distinguished church leaders, dear colleagues, students, dear distinguished guests. It is my great pleasure to welcome you to this special event within the framework of our conference between Cosmology and Community, Religion and Sustainable Development, a panel discussion on the topic Development Policy and Religion, What is the Way Forward? And I would like to briefly outline what the idea behind this theme is. Now, we have been engaging with religion and development over the past 2.5 days from a mainly academic perspective. We have also heard distinguished church leaders' views on development. What we have not heard so much, I know we have some practitioners among the participants of practitioners and policymakers among the participants of this conference, but what we have not engaged with in depth is the policy side of things. And I mentioned in my opening statement on Tuesday that in the recent years, we have not only seen in the academic discourse an increasing attention to religion and development, to the interrelation of religion and development, or religion and sustainable development, but there's also a move in development policy and practice circles to engage with religion and development. There are various initiatives in this respect, for example by the World Bank, by the British Department for International Development, and several others. And one of these initiatives is an initiative on religion and development by the German Federal Ministry of Economic Cooperation and Development, started in 2014. And this has, among other things, led to the foundation of the International Partnership on Religion and Sustainable Development, in short, PARD. And so we're very happy that we are now able to engage with this policy and practice dimension of religion and development, where we have seen in the past years this increasing engagement, we don't know where it will lead and what the conclusions or what the implications are that are taken out of this discussion and the conceptual engagement with this topic. So we are very happy that we have distinguished guests on this panel who will enlighten us on this. And I would like to just say that we are greatly appreciating your presence here, and it's really wonderful having you. Thank you very much for accepting our invitation. I will briefly introduce our panel chair, Mrs. Gabriele Meister, who is a journalist, studied theology. She studied theology in Heidelberg, Stellenbosch, and Hamburg, and she has a Master's of Divinity from Stellenbosch. I always like that title, Master of Divinity. I really envy that. As an economist, I really envy that. And she attended one of the most renowned journalism schools in Germany, the Henry-Nannen-Schule in Hamburg. She has been working as a freelance journalist for various years in various functions for various national newspapers, national public television and radio stations, and she is also the author of a book that relates well to our discussions of yesterday, and I will try to translate the title, Sexuality and the Church. Homo, bi, trans and intersexuality. So you're most welcome to engage with her on that after this panel discussion. Now the topic is development policy and religion, what is the way forward? Gabriele, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you, Philip, for the warm welcome. Or maybe I shouldn't say warm within these hot summer days and discussions about global warming. Well, anyway, thank you, Philip. I'm really happy to chair this afternoon's discussion. And I would like to structure our discussion into 3 parts. Number 1, religion in development cooperation. What is the status quo? Number 2, how does religion hinder or foster development? And after that, we'll have time for some questions from you all. And then we continue with our 3rd part, number 3. What are criteria for a fruitful cooperation with religious actors? What structures do we need? And how do actors need to change? And after that, we have time for a 2nd round for questions, because I think I'm so happy that you all are here and you have so many backgrounds, and I learned that we have even people coming from South Africa. Maybe you wave the people from South Africa. Hey, it's great to have you here. Maybe other people from African countries here. Welcome to Berlin. People from other continents, maybe from Latin America. Okay, welcome. And people from Europe. Okay. Australia. United States. The States. Okay. Some from the Antarctic, maybe? No one? Okay. So it's really great to have you all here. And also our panel is very diverse. On my left-hand side, I would like to introduce Dr. Claudia Zilla. You are head of the research division, the Americas, of the German Institute for International and Security Affairs. Your institute gives mainly advice to the German government, but is also relevant to international organizations such as the NATO, the European Union, and the United Nations. Claudia, you are a political scientist and you bring a researcher's perspective to our panel. You come from Argentina and your field of research is Latin America. So welcome to our discussion. Next to Claudia, we have Michael Plesch, head of the division Churches, Political Foundations, Sector Approaches, Religion and Sustainable Development at the German Federal Ministry for Economic Cooperation and Development. Michael, welcome. Michael studied geography, political science, and economics, and also worked at the Konrad Adenauer Foundation and has experiences from Brazil, Zambia, Palestine, Bangladesh, and many other countries. Michael, you will share perspectives of governmental actors. It's great to have you here. On my right-hand side, we have Reinhard Palm, Director of the Africa Department at Bread for the World. Bread for the World, as you may know, is the globally active development and relief agency of the Protestant churches in Germany. And before you worked at Bread for the World, you studied economics and political science, as Michael, and you worked for governmental and non-governmental organizations in Germany, Afghanistan, and African countries. You will enrich our panel with a perspective from a faith-based organization and practical experiences. So, thank you for joining. And last but not least, we have Reverend Nicta Lubaale, General Secretary of the Organization of African Instituted Churches. African Instituted Churches are founded originally during the colonial period as grassroots Christian movements, but have developed indigenous forms of worship, theology, and social organization, and are independent from their mother churches. Many of the African Instituted Churches describe themselves as Pentecostal, and they're really growing very fast. Coming back to you, Nicta, before you became General Secretary at the Organization of African Instituted Churches, you served as a pastor in Uganda, and later on you worked as a director for the development and HIV/AIDS program. You bring to us a perspective of a Ugandan theologian dealing with practical development work in Africa. So, ladies and gentlemen, let's welcome Claudia, Michael, Reinhard and Nicta with a big round of applause. Thank you very much. So let's start our first round of discussion with a little intellectual game to wake you up from the little afternoon nap. I would like you to think of the role of religion in development cooperation in terms of animals. And what kind of animal could that be? Religion in development cooperation. What characteristics would religion have? So, Nicta, what is your animal?
I would like to look at an eagle, and not from its aggressive nature, but from its ability to go through renewal, even when it's old, taking time to take out the old nails and feathers and the beak. If I can take away the aggressive nature which the dove has, that it doesn't have, certainly it's that demand on itself for self-renewal.
Okay.
That's what I look at.
Thank you. And Michael, what did you pick? Sorry, Reinhard.
Good afternoon. I would pick an elephant, and I think it's in the end, if you're on safari in Africa and you will see how the landscape looks like, is in the end often dominated by the elephant, whether it's overgrazed or not overgrazed. When you see an elephant and its herd going through the area, you will see the marks all over. It looks like a humble and silent animal, but it's very mighty. And if you endanger him or his children, he can be even an aggressive animal. He can be an unpleasant animal. Even if he looks so peaceful, he can be an extremely strong force. So you have to count on it.
Okay. Other peaceful or aggressive animals, Michael?
Now that Reinhard stole the elephant, I'm taking the fish.
Beforehand you told me you would also pick the elephant.
But now he stole the elephant already. And that's why I'm taking the fish, if you allow me to. The fish is, for me, religion is like being a fish. The fish is everywhere. The fish is in the sea, the fish is in the lakes, the fish is in all the rivers. The fish helps sustain the human beings. And in the end, religion for me means also a way of living and surviving all the work, the harassment, but also having a lot of nice moments during the services and so on. So the fish for me who sustains me, and as I said, I worked in Palestine. I also spent a lot of time at, what is it in English? Lake
Yes.
Lay in sea, and that was always very inspiring. And we all remember the distribution. They had two fish and 5 breads, and they fed 5,000 people. So in that sense, fish for me is a sign for religion.
Okay, and you, Claudia?
I'll take the chameleon because it changes depending on the context. And I think we have a lot of religions, we have a lot of churches, but you always have to look at the national level or even at the local level to find out what the relationship between religion and development is. So it depends very, very much on the context, and that's why I see this connection as a chameleon.
Thank you very much. Nicta, you picked the eagle, and how does that tie in with personal experience? You said something about renewal, but maybe you can tie that to practical experiences you made.
My coming into development was not out of training, it was out of mission, and the demand of my church on me as a pastor, a young man who was in pastoral training. And this was in the early 90s, in the era of HIV and AIDS. As a young man in training, I'm faced with a woman whose husband was dying, a child was infected, and she said, I'm here, I need help. And it was at the peak of stigma, but I realized that even without any training on HIV and AIDS, what I had in my heart is the compassion of Christ. And that set me into working. And out of interaction with that experience, I moved to the nearby district hospital and started working with nurses and doctors who were counseling about and giving treatment. That time we were talking about treating opportunistic infections without ARVs because your countries, you who are sitting here, had said we couldn't have those medicines. I'm joking about it. But out of that, interestingly, in giving leadership voluntarily, we were able to build a network of teachers, of nurses, of peasants, of pastors, of women leaders that gave care to over 4,000 people living with HIV. For me, it was out of the faith motivation. It was not out of donation. So that is my experience, that the faith motivation can move you to do things, and that is the basis for the resource.
Thank you very much. So you would also say that it was crucial that it was a Christian, or so to say, a religious hospital, or you also counseled the people, and it was not a secular hospital. So that also helped the people. So that was crucial.
Well, it was a government hospital.
Oh, okay.
Secular, but at the same, this is the partnership. There is a public institution, and there are people of faith out there. Mm-hmm. And it is that partnership. And interestingly, again, resources came in from civil society organizations. So, but it was motivated by people of faith who came together and said, we can do something even without money. So it was a public institution.
And in which other fields does your organization work? So you mentioned HIV/AIDS and hospitals. What other fields do you work in?
At that time, it was before I joined the Organization of African Instituted Churches. But for the Organization of African Instituted Churches where I work, we are involved in 4 major areas. 1, community health. 2, just communities in being prophetic to the issues that affect Africa and the rest of the world. 3, livelihoods, especially in responding to hunger, food insecurity and poverty through the equipping of small-scale farmers. And finally, for theology and ministerial formation. Those are the areas through which we serve the community.
And on which level do you do that? Is it on an institutional level, or also at a household level that you have partnerships, or community level, congregational level?
Let me talk about livelihoods. That is concrete, since we are talking about SDGs and ending hunger. That's goal 1 and goal number 2. We do it at the household level, and right now we have a process for reaching 7.5 million households that end hunger. And we've started with Eastern Africa. We've worked in partnership with Bread for the World, and we've already done 100,000. And we are moving. It's done through the congregation. The congregation at the local level is the basic structure for mobilization, for training, for conscientization, for organizing and for advocacy. So, but the real unit that we have to reach is the household, the family, because we will never be doing development. It will remain superficial if we are just simply talking about it in workshops, in meetings, in hotels, until we've reached the family and this individual who is in hunger and poverty, then we are not doing development. So it's transformation at household level, and but at the same time in the framework of a community.
Okay,
Yeah.
so you would say we work with all African people rather than our target group is just the community of or the members of the organization of African instituted churches. No, you would say we work with all African people. Would you? Wouldn't you?
People of all faith, and in fact, if there were any Europeans in poverty, we would work with them. So all people. As I said, the church is a mobilizing structure for the mission of God, for abundance of life for all. So whether you're Muslim, Hindu, Catholic, African Independent, Pentecostal, our work is there any hungry person anywhere, that person should get out of hunger.
Okay.
It doesn't matter the religion.
And who are your partners in terms of institutions from the global north?
Let me start with the partners in the south. The family, the congregation, the faith communities at the local level, women organizations, young people's organizations, but also especially farmers' organizations. And those are the contributors who bring over 80% of the resources that are needed, and these resources are non-monetary. I'm saying this because I'm starting with the biggest partners. And then there is the smaller partners like Bread for the World, who bring the important 20%. Interestingly, if that 20% is not available, it's difficult to activate the 80%. So these partnerships are deeply important. So we worked closely with Bread for the World for long, and we appreciate that. We decided to get out at the global level to partner with the UN, especially in the SDGs. The Organization of African Instituted Churches is the convener of the Africa Interfaith Initiative on SDGs. And we had to pull together the faith communities of Africa to participate in shaping the SDGs. And now,
maybe not everybody knows what SDG means. Maybe you could briefly.
The Sustainable Development Goals. Oh, these are great people. I've heard them talk about them. The 17 goals that came after the Millennium Development Goals as a way of working together, cooperating globally, and agreeing that we should end extreme poverty by the year 2030. We've worked in partnership with the World Bank. We've worked in partnership with the Christian Aid in the UK and the other partners, yeah.
Okay, thank you for that. I think it's you also mentioned Bread for the World. That's a good point to switch over to you, Reinhard. Bread for the World is the development agency of the Protestant churches in Germany, so religion is deeply rooted in your work. And how does religion influence your strategy in comparison to the strategies of secular agency? What would you say?
Well, I mean, we are founded by the Protestant churches, and it's not only the mainline churches. It's really most of the Protestant churches are behind us, and so we have a mandate really. To work worldwide, specifically with faith-based organizations, and this don't have to be restricted on a Protestant spectrum, but this is the main cooperation partners. And so about 2/3 of the organizations we are working with in Africa are Protestant churches or faith-based organizations which are around Protestant churches or interreligious faith-based organizations. So just from the partners we are working with, of course religion is the background, and also the money we get from the public about half our resources are public resources, and the other half are coming from the churches or our donations, are specifically geared also to reach out to these kind of organizations.
Well, this is on an organizational level, but you also talked about the motivation behind. Maybe you also have some religious motivation behind, or would you say not at all? It's just the way we are funded. We are funded by churches.
Yeah.
But
I mean, we started. We are celebrating our 60th year, and it's quite interesting that our ancestor organizations were organizations which were founded to do relief work after the Second World War, where we received donation from other countries. And then 60 years ago, the churches realized now we want to give back, and the suffering in the world is a suffering which goes to our heart, and we want to extend the diaconic work to the world. And they called them for all people to help them. And so there is this Christian motivations to give back and to make our belief in God concrete to the people in all over the world. And I think it translates in a slightly different kind of development work than maybe other organizations are doing, where we try to bring together, I mean, the concrete work, for example, in food security, together with the OAICs, with an approach where we look holistically on the human beings behind it, and where we work through communities. And of course, the majority of them are Christian communities, but it's an approach which is ingrained to all our work, even if we work with secular organizations.
But you don't do missionary work, that you told me.
No, I mean, this is completely clear, not only for public money, anyhow, it's forbidden to do missionary work, but also from the church resources. It's clear that we have the mission societies who are still supporting perhaps evangelization, even if nowadays missionary work and evangelization is something completely different than maybe 100 years ago. But when we have a clear mandate to do diaconic work, social work, political work, and we are not allowed even to do missionary work. So in practice, sometimes, of course, it might be the boundaries are not always so clear. So we can work in theological education, but only if this is really related to development work. So, for example, to work on ecological questions in theological education. So this is allowed, but not really to work in theology and evangelization.
You also mentioned a holistic approach. What do you mean by that?
Now, if I go back to food security, if we are doing a food security work, we wouldn't only look to increase the production of grain, but really, I mean, as Nicta said, I mean, this would be based in community work, and to look at the whole family, at the whole community, and to do it in an ecological work. So, I mean, about 2/3 of our projects in food security are really based on ecological principles, because we believe this is something which embraces also a theological thinking of the preservation. Now I'm lacking the word. Schöpfung. Creation. Thank you. So to do it this in a different way. So a kind of a high-tech approach on increasing agricultural production, I think, wouldn't be something which is resembling the needs of communities, and specifically also of religious communities in Africa.
So you mainly work with the churches, and what about new African movements? Would you like to reach out to other partners as well?
What do you mean with new African movements?
Or maybe I should rather say other religious movements, or Muslims, or Buddhists, or other communities. I think it's good to have long-term partnerships, which you of course have, but maybe you would also like to make a new step and reach out to new partners.
Well, I mean, we constantly try to renew our partnership spectrum, and even if, but of course I think where our expertise is mainly with faith-based organizations in the wider Protestant spectrum, where we still see so many opportunities to work with strong partner, and we work increasingly with ecumenical bodies where the whole spectrum of ecumenical partners are in, from the traditional Protestant mainline mission churches over evangelical churches, Pentecostals or African instituted churches, where we try to bring together these organizations. Because I mean, this fostering of the ecumenical spirit is something where we see a specific high need, because we have this kind of landscape in a lot of countries where the voice, the prophetic voice of the church is not heard if they are not coming together. For example, I just told Nicta, I was in Zimbabwe, where you can really see how the churches, and this is really all churches together, are the last voice of the civil society standing up against the powers for a just and democratic society. And we really embrace this kind of efforts where we have there this ecumenical church leader forums where we bring them together. And in this spirit, of course, it is changing, because if you're working now even with a normal council of churches in most countries, it will include a very broad a variety of churches, where these new churches are often part in it. And here my colleague Thomas Stefan just had a look at our portfolio, and then we figured out that anyhow about 50 of our projects are embracing Pentecostal or African instituted churches. So in this spectrum we already have a broad partnership, and we definitely are looking to work more with interreligious councils, which are there in some countries, and we are doing work with them. But I wouldn't see our expertise to say now we want to look specifically with this Buddhist or Islamic churches. I wouldn't rule it out. If the opportunity is there, we do it. But then, of course, they have to prove that they are the best to reach our mandate, working with the poor in a specific region, or to be the voice of the poor. And then we say, of course, we work with you, because we work also with secular organizations. But I mean, somehow naturally, I think we are expanding and working more in the Protestant spectrum of churches. Okay, so you would rather say we use the trust we have instead of just searching in the dark? No, I mean, we are not starting from point zero. We have about 500 partner organizations in Africa. And to be practical, we say about every year 10% of them should be new partners. So maybe we are including every year 50 different new partner organizations. But it's developing out of existing cooperation, as I said, and mainly out of the existing networks which we have over Council of Churches or ecumenical bodies like Christian health associations, and starting from there. And yeah, so this is where also we are contacted from, and so I mean it's welcomed if we have an Islamic partner. For example, in Nigeria, we talked about it. We were really looking to how to work on this religious named conflict. It's not a religious conflict, but it's often seen as one. And how can we partner with Islamic organizations? It's often not so easy to find them, but we are highly motivated to work on this interreligious dimension. But it's not so far what is coming naturally to us. Thank you. So let's switch to you, Michael. You have a special task because you come from a governmental actor. So you are financed by taxes, and so you have to be neutral in terms of religion. But still you support religious activities, so to say. So how do you resolve this problem, being neutral but still willing to support religious activities?
Yeah, the question there is what does it mean neutral? Neutral doesn't mean that I shouldn't work with anybody. Neutral means we are not there, as Reinhard rightly pointed out, we are not supporting any missionary type of work. That's the important point. But of course, churches, and let me call it in broader terms, religious actors, faith-based organizations are part of our spectrum of cooperation, as long as they do development work. No? That's an important point. No missionary work, but development work, we do cooperate. And this has a very long tradition. Bread for the World and Miserio on the other side, the two main organizations in Germany, church-based ones, both celebrated 60 years last year. And I think in 1 or 2 years we will celebrate something like 50 to 60 years of cooperation with them. And all the time, again and again, we had a certain discussions. Sometimes there were projects where we said it's too close to the question of theological approaches or missionary approaches. This kind of project we don't want. But we have developed deep trust between the church organizations here in Germany and the ministry. So here it works. Now, in addition, that's why within my division there is also the question of religion and development. We are trying to widen the base. That means we are looking for more partners to cooperate, for more faith-based organizations to include them in the work. And that doesn't mean, and also have to say that, it doesn't mean that we want to use them as kind of instruments. We are always accused that we are trying to use the churches as instruments. No. But we are looking for more partners beyond the two main church aid agencies.
You also told me that after 9/11, people would like to reach out to Muslim communities or agencies, but this aim didn't last long. But to whom would you reach out now?
Okay, yeah, I mean, as you can see with my gray beard, I'm already quite a long time in development cooperation, and I can always see certain, we have the Fashion Week here in Berlin in the moment, and there are also certain fashions in development approaches. That's after 9/11, there was a lot of talk of religion and development, especially of Islam and development. And quite a number of projects were undertaken, research projects and so on by GIZ, nowadays GIZ, in those days GTZ, by the Friedrich Ebert Foundation, the Konrad Adenauer Foundation and so on. And that was what was a bit strange. By the end of the first decade of this millennium, it all died down. And then when work was restarted, as I say, I'm already an old man, when work was restarted, I, for example, remembered those type of work, and I told the young new guys and girls and say, you look into your archives, a lot of work was done between 2002 and 2009. I don't know exactly what happened by 2009 when all this work somehow died.
Sometimes you never know what happens.
It somehow died. Actually, I never researched why it died, because in 2014 we restarted it. There was a certain sense that one had to look also into the question of how to include religious actors in the work. And I mean, here in Germany, we think a bit different. Somebody mentioned it, 80% of the people within the world somehow are believers in a religion and say religion is important for me in the daily life too. So we try to reach out to these people, but the problem for us Germans is that in the ministry and also in the different organizations, we have a lot of people who are a-religious. I mentioned this yesterday already to our friends here. It's less convincing people in Africa, Latin America, or Asia. It's more a problem here in Germany to convince people.
I think we will come back to that point later on.
Yeah, but I just want to close it. When you look into development cooperation, when you work somewhere, you can't do it without looking at religious actors. Full stop.
And now you would like to reach out to independent churches because they are growing so fast?
That's not because they are growing so fast, and it's actually not we reach out as a ministry, but we work, my department, cooperation with the civil society, we work with civil society, and we are talking with civil society, and there are a lot of, let's say, in the end, faith-based organizations, and say, we have to broaden our spectrum, and we have also to take into consideration what is there in the different countries around the world. And that's what we do, is we do kind of mapping of religious actors. To find out who else is there, whom we should approach when, not we as a ministry, but our organizations should approach. And it was mentioned by Philip in the beginning that there is the International Partnership on Religion and Sustainable Development. These are faith-based organizations, and they do exactly that. They look out for different partners. In the moment, PART has 120 members, mainly from the north, and the point is we are trying to find more partners, and that's why I'm happy. Yesterday I met a number of people. Today I brought also some information along, so that we want to broaden the international partnership and include more and more partners from the south, because you are the people to decide on your own fate, not we.
Thank you for that. We've talked a bit about Africa, so let's switch to Latin America. Claudia, you said that religion is like a chameleon. It always depends on the context, but maybe you could still mention some key points about the situation in Latin America, and also how you see the relationship between political groups and religion.
Yes. I'm a political scientist. I'm a political scientist, and we advise, based on our research, the German government and the parliament. And since I've been observing, or I've been following development in Latin America, which I believe it is very important for the society, for the economy, and for politics in the region, I thought the government should be aware, and the parliament too. Everybody who is working on a policy towards Latin America should be aware, and that's why I started to do some research on this. On what? The thing is, Philip Ullmann mentioned the religious term. I would say we have in Latin America a religious switching, and it consists of people leaving the Catholic Church and going to evangelical churches. I name them, I call them evangelical. Most of them are Pentecostal, and they are very different. They are very diverse. We have a lot of different churches. There is
the evangelical churches are in fact old Catholic churches. So Catholics are now evangelical.
The Catholics
they become evangelical.
Yes,
so
they are switching.
They convert.
But the evangelicals are Protestants in a very broad sense, and not Catholics.
Yes, but the people convert.
Yes, and what we do have in Latin America now is not growing secularism, but growing religiosity. Because people who were, for example, very passive Catholic believers are becoming very active members of evangelical churches. So you have not only their religious switching, but also a growing intensity of religiosity. And you can observe it in the urban areas, former cinemas, former theaters becoming new temples full of people, and next to this temple a more or less empty Catholic church. You can observe it in the prisons. How do you say Seelsorge is counseling is being done in prisons by evangelicals, and you have evangelical churches in slums and in very peripheral areas where you don't see the state or the Catholic Church. And this growing presence of evangelical churches, this is for me a new scenario, and it is becoming, in my view, not only in terms of development, but also in terms of politics, more and more important.
Yeah, they have a lot of influence, I guess, also in terms of Bolsonaro or other people. Isn't that also a threat?
The question is...
There's no division between political parties and religious communities anymore. Or if there was before, so intertwined so much politics and religion.
I can agree with these general affirmations. I would say the first question is who are they, because it's not a homogeneous they. Not every church engage or every evangelical community engages in politics. And as I said, because I've chose the chameleon, not evangelicals in every country are not the same. So depending on the context, I would say yes or no to your generalizations, but I wouldn't say this is the case for the whole region, and this is the case for the evangelicals as a homogeneous groups, because they are not an homogeneous group.
Yeah, as we already heard, it can be, the picture is very diverse. So let's come to our second part of the discussion. What are potentials and what hinders development in terms of religion? So I would like to start with a question to you all, to the audience. Maybe it's again a bit flat, but to get to the point we need maybe also some broader questions. So imagine a religious group in a very poor region of the world, and it's ruled by criminals, and religious actors are the only ones who have access to the poorest of the poor. So their religion really fosters development cooperation, because they are only ones who have access to the poor people. But on the other hand, imagine maybe a region where Ebola spreads, and their religion can really hinder development cooperation, because medical treatment, people would say, no, we don't need medical treatment, we rather believe a dubious comment of a religious leader who says, well, take onions. So we also heard that. So on the whole, who of you thinks that religion rather fosters development cooperation? Maybe you raise your hand.
Even in Ebola cases.
Okay, only one. So only one, two. Only one thinks that it fosters, yes? So it's a chance, so that religion is a chance for development cooperation. So who thinks that, a chance? Okay, maybe it's half of you. And who thinks that it's rather an impediment, who thinks religion hinders development cooperation? Okay, almost no one. Okay, maybe the other ones are in between. Okay, let's see what our panel thinks. Nicta, so you are a pastor and of course so to say religious person, but in which situations did you think religion challenges or even hinders our development cooperation? And what situation come to your mind? Is there any where religion hinders development cooperation?
I don't see any, but sometimes it's the way maybe religion is practiced. It may not simply hinder development cooperation, because first and foremost, religion is not for development cooperation. Religion is for the good of society, and then development cooperation comes. Because if we start with the development cooperation, it becomes a little tricky, because there is already development cooperation within the religious people themselves. Mm-hmm. So development is not simply what comes from outside. There is already what is going on. Most likely we are talking about religion and development cooperation with external partners. I think those are. So it comes on both sides, not simply for the religious communities, but also for the development cooperators. Sometimes on the side of religious communities, it can be like, let me talk concretely on the situation of HIV and AIDS. There are some few, not a majority, of some faith communities, churches, which said, okay, you don't need to take ARVs, antiretrovirals. Once you are prayed for, you are okay. Believe that you are okay. That can be a hindrance, not simply for development cooperation, but for the good of the people. It becomes a hindrance. And then that moves also into cooperation, because how do you cooperate for distribution, or how do you cooperate on access to ARVs if on the other side you are saying prayer is enough? That is the whole thing. But
how did you deal with that challenge?
Dealing with that challenge is, in the OAIC, we talk about constructive engagement, and we talk about critical dialogue. We have to critique ourselves. So it's about engaging and transforming such belief systems, not for development cooperation, but for the good of the community, and then development cooperation comes into that context, because the engagement is always for the good, for the common good. So it's about transforming theologies, it's about transforming belief systems as an internal engagement process, and it works. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So Reinhard and Michael, what challenges did you experience, and how did you deal with it? In terms of religion that hinders development cooperation?
I mean, there's no doubt that there are in the world often religions which are increasing a conflict, for example, or at least that religion is misused if there's already an underlying economic conflict, or a conflict on resources, or a power struggle, and then often people are using religion because it's perhaps tied to a specific group to motivate the people or misuse the people for their own sake, for the access of resources, to strengthen their power. So we see this very often, and we have to cope with it. And in Africa, out of the history of mission, you often see that a specific denomination in a country is also linked to a specific ethnia or a specific region, and so different denominations, if they are not cautious, can inflict a conflict out of this kind of historic tradition.
But how do you cope with it? I mean, coping. What coping strategy do you have?
This is what I said, that we are in many countries, maybe even in the majority of the countries where we are working with ecumenical bodies, where we bring the churches together. And for example, in South Sudan, there's such a case where you see that not all religious communities were always helpful in strengthening peace. And it was also for us difficult how to engage with churches. But we saw a great renewal of the Southern Sudan Council of Churches, which in this country is actually a body where the Catholic Church is in it and is now the driving force, and the General Secretary is a father, is a Catholic. And this was then where we really tried to strengthen the cooperation between the churches, which was a strong voice to bring together the different competing ethnic groups in
So you
South
would
Sudan.
go to another local partner and tell him, okay, please talk to this other local partners and convince him or her? Or
No, I think you will find normally in all situations inside the faith-based communities such who are looking for peace and for progressive development and for democracy. And I think we are not forced to work with a church who is neglecting democracy or who has this kind of problematic stance against AIDS. We found organizations where church leaders who were AIDS positive worked together and spoke open about being HIV AIDS positive, and we worked with them together, and then from the inside of their churches transformed the thinking about HIV AIDS. And the same is true, for example, where we're looking for health organizations. I mean, Hans Spitzer just mentioned how we could transform, and it was very important in resolving Ebola in Sierra Leone and Liberia to work with Christian Health Association, which were very progressive in fighting traditional beliefs. And I think this is something which is the strength of Bread for the World, that we have a network of organization and sensitivity to hear on our brothers and sisters who are calling for them to strengthen, to transform their churches and their nations out of their beliefs. And this is why often, besides, and Zimbabwe is again a good case where we had a problematic council of churches, where we stopped working with them because they were siding with the power with Mugabe. But there were very many Zimbabwean church leaders who were frustrated, and they formed the Zimbabwe Christian Alliance and the Ecumenical Church Leader Forums, two organizations where people for peace and democracy in Zimbabwe joined forces, and we were working with them together. And now the Council of Churches again is on a very good track, and after 10 years we restarted the cooperation. So I think this is also where I think Bread for the World has a strength vis-a-vis the World Bank or GIZ, that we are in the ecumenical family. We have a sensitivity to see for those people who are working in a positive manner on SDGs and really transforming the ecumenical landscape from within.
Michael, on the other hand, I read in one of your papers from 2016 that sometimes it's better to factor religion out because it hinders development cooperation. I read, it will not always be helpful or possible to engage closely with religious actors. Sometimes it is more useful to deliberately factor religion out. So when is that the case, and how do you do that, to factor out religion?
Yeah, factor out religion is a very difficult term. Let me put it that way. We have certain principles. One of our main principles is the Declaration of Human Rights. So this is absolutely important for us. So a religious community who is against the basic human rights can't be a partner for us. That's the point where we do not collaborate. But we do
so
not
you
cooperate.
wouldn't say you wouldn't factor out religion, but you would change the partner.
Yeah, that's the correct term. Let me put it that way. I hope I'm not insulting anybody here from the Muslim community, but for example, in West Africa, bit by bit, the Wahhabis were taking over certain development activities. And in the consequence, for example, the rights of women were diminished. So these organizations coming from the Arabian Peninsula working in West Africa are no partners for us. They are not partners. We do not cooperate with them because they are against certain basic rights we are following, and we can't cooperate with them. So that's a question of not factoring out religion, but looking exactly of what kind of faith-based organization does it. But I normally believe more in giving good examples. One example is Nigeria, where my sister comes from. Nigeria, not we as a ministry directly, but through German CSOs, civil society organizations, NGOs, there we helped local organizations to start a kind of dialogue and peace program in the question of Muslims and Christians. because the conflict there, it was pointed out already, the conflict in Nigeria is not a conflict between Muslims and Christians as such. It's, in the end, they are used as an instrument within power struggles within the Nigerian elite. I say it. Now you can. So what we did, for example, the Archbishop Kaigama from, I forgot what diocese is, and the Emir Moasu from one of the big Islamic leaders, they work together in trying to explain that Christians and Muslims are human beings. It's not a question a Muslim is a human being and a Christian not, or a Christian is a human being or a Muslim not. So they did a lot of work, supported, they did their own work, but they got a little support from our side, from the German side, through German NGOs. And that is one of the positive examples. And in the beginning, our colleague Nicta mentioned also the AIDS question. I mean, a best practice example is also the work in West Africa, in Sierra Leone, Liberia, and Guinea. So the point there was the question of funerals. I myself worked 5 years in Zambia. I know how important the funeral is and how important it is to say goodbye to your loved ones. So the point always was to say goodbye means touching the body. And touching the body in the Ebola crisis was a very difficult point. So actually, big Protestant organization worked together with church leaders and with Muslim leaders in the question of explaining to the people that because of this difficult situation, you have to say goodbye without touching them, and that this is not showing disrespect. No? Very important, not only in Africa, also for me as a German, to show respect is absolutely important. So we were told, there was a kind of conscientization campaign that please say goodbye to your loved ones without touching them, otherwise you will continue transmitting this kind of disease. So I would say, and it worked because the people didn't believe in the state, in the health service, but they believed the priests and their imams.
Thank you for that. I would like to know maybe from a more theoretical point of view from you, Claudia. We have heard some communities, you said you work with all people, no matter if they're Christians or Muslims, and you said, okay, the matter, and you also said the matter is if they are reliable, if they respect human rights, and that's the point with whom you work. So Claudia, do you think it's easier if both partners are Christians, or is it maybe easier if you would like to reach out to maybe a Muslim community? Is it then easier if you are an atheist, or is it rather that both are religious? Do you know anything about that? How similar partner should be? If that is a matter, how good the relationship is, the partnership, doesn't it matter?
I do not believe that the main division is along religion or institutionalized religions. Take Catholicism in Latin America. You have in Latin America the liberation theology and Opus Dei. And they are not people who like to work together, and they belong to the same Catholic Church. So I do not believe that these poor or only institutional lines are always the key division or the key difference between beliefs. I think religions are diverse, and you have people on the left and on the right, people who are very liberal, people who have a very literal reading of the Bible. You have all those differences, I convinced, in every religion. So I would say you have to look at the case to be able to give an answer to this question.
Okay. Thank you very much. I think to...
May I add only one thing, because I don't think we are taking into account the beliefs related to the question of development. But in Latin America, the question if it's good or bad for development is not a question of beliefs, I would say, but how these institutions or these churches are organized and who are the leaders of them. So the main problem to development related to these communities is the question, are they corrupt as other parties in Latin America? Do you have corruption? Do you have clientelism? Do you have charismatic leaders who are very popular and then tell the people who to vote for? This is the question. For me, this is the key question on the relationship between religion and development. Not a question of beliefs, but a question of how these communities are organized and being led.
Okay, thank you for that. To wake you up a little bit, we have time for 3 questions now. So who would like to ask a question? Okay, maybe you start.
I'm Nora Buding. I'm part of a student here in Humboldt University, and my question is to all of you as we talked about like development work on the
development on the individual people, like talking about sick people facing Ebola. But as I see you on stage now, I don't understand you as actors of working on development work with the individual. More or less, you work on a systematic level, right? And I wonder what your perspective is. What is the system, like you as a government actor working in a foreign country on development, and when you talked before also about how you choose the partners on certain issues. So I wonder about how do you see development on a systematic level in your position, or like also for you, Nicta, like what do you think about the others coming into your country and working on this systematic development? Not really on the individual, more like, how do you see this kind of development and your role in this?
Maybe you would like to answer, Michael?
I mean, life is always a bit complicated, but I work in the ministry with the civil society division, or not division, department. We have 5 divisions, and so we don't go to Kenya or Nigeria and do the work. Not we as a ministry. We work with German NGOs. So our first partner is the German NGO, which in turn has partners in Nigeria, Liberia, wheresoever. For example, in the question of AIDS, it was World Vision working there. Having established all their having established a long-term partnership, they were working there for 30 or more years. So they got through from World Vision Germany gets the money from us, and they do the work there. And we do not interfere. In the cooperation of my ministry with German civil society is with a minimum of interference in the work outside. The interference is concerning certain administrative rules, but not the content. Not the content. We have a few criteria, as I said, human rights and so on. But the rest is up to them, and we are proud of it.
Okay, thank you. Maybe,
one of the very few countries, sometimes I think we are the only one, who really does it like that.
Thank you. Maybe you ask your question again later, because we have to speed up a little bit. Maybe the second question.
And I would love to answer shortly.
Okay, well then shortly answer.
Okay. You mentioned my name. Systemic, are you talking about the structural issues?
Yeah, or like exactly what you said. I'm interested
Certainly, first of all, we are not an instrument for external projects. That is the very first thing.
Okay, thank you.
Then two, we are not an instrument for foreign policy of foreign countries. But at the same time, we live on the same planet Earth. And we have to pull together, whether it's Africa, Uganda, Kenya, Nigeria, Zambia, and Germany and UK, to talk about this Earth we are living on, so that we forge together and work for abundance of life or dignity of all. That's where we come from. The other side of it, that we don't simply focus on the individuals, and development is not simply cooperating with the people from outside, or with agencies of the way cooperate with the Bread for the World. It's also within Africa to transform the realities in areas of governance, accountability, corruption, access to basic services. That is a major area for us as OAIC, and we are working on processes of social accountability, because we know that however much you pump money in Africa, if public institutions and those who occupy them are not using well the resources of the taxpayer, then we are not going to go far. So it's both cooperation from outside, but also engaging the institutions within Africa.
Thank you. Maybe you in the middle. We will also later on have a second round for questions, so don't...
Can I say that? Can I go ahead?
Sorry, it's 10 to 5. I have to be strict now.
Yeah.
I said 3 questions, so maybe later.
Yeah, okay. So my question goes to the government representative and Nicta. So from the government representative, you say that one of the criterion that you use for identifying partners is
I will come back to that point.
On rights,
so,
position on rights.
Yeah.
So now, Nicta, what is your organization's position on LGBTQ, gay marriages, and the government representative? What's your position on that? And do you see Nicta's organization as a potential partner?
Well, I think we'll come back to that question of the criteria. So maybe we'll have a third question now, and then continue with our discussion, and later on have a second round of questions. Okay, so would you, or maybe you, would you like to ask a question, third question? Yes? Mm-hmm.
So I'm an American, and I founded a nonprofit organization with the headquarters in California, but we also founded an NGO in Uganda, and we're concerned with women's rights, and we are building a campus for women to give them a place where they can recuperate from drug abuse, or an option to come and live with us and learn skills in order to leave life in the brothel. And we are also partnering with the International Justice Mission out of Washington, D.C., and they're rescuing children out of slave labor not far from our campus. So my question is very personal as to whether I would be considered as a candidate, organizations, for partnership, Michael, with you, and also with you, Reinhard.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, for Bread for the World, and I mean, working together with a Ghanaian organization who is working on women, empowering women on women's rights or against child labor, definitely is something we are doing. We are just about, or we just launched a huge campaign together with the Indian Nobel laureate, 100 million for 100 million against child labor. So definitely we can do it. as far as your Ghanaian organization is organized as a Ghanaian NGO, we wouldn't work with an American or even with a German NGO working on that. I mean, it always has to be local organizations. They can be secular, they can be faith-based. So that's in principle possible. May I say just 2 sentences on the structural issues, please? Because I mean, there's one thing I really like to answer how we would deal with that. I mean, our view is that not directly we as Bread for the World has to work on the structural issues, but mainly we try to give the voice our African partners in it. So for example, we had before the German Kirchentag, we had a delegation from African organizations led by ACC, the umbrella organization of the Protestant churches, to speak about the Agenda 2063 of the African Union, and brought them together, for example, with the State Secretary of BMZ and the highest part in foreign affairs, that they really could give their voice, what they think about all these German initiatives like Marshall Plan and Compact with Africa, and that they can have a chance to shape international policies, and we are mainly, I mean, the advocates to let them speak their voices, and they do it very well.
Okay. Michael, would you like to add to this point, or maybe later then?
No, just a short answer. I can give you an address later on where you can send your proposal to, but then all your organization will be checked a little bit, because there are thousands of German NGOs, and so we have a screening process to see if you are economically viable, that you are surviving, and so on. So there's a certain procedure.
But we are all checked already through Google, Facebook, and so we know that process.
But you are
CIA.
even checked more. But you are even checked more, because we are checked by the famous or infamous Federal Audit Office and by the German taxpayers.
Okay. So thank you very much, and I apologize that I am maybe a bit harsh, but I also have to keep the watch. So let's come to our third part. What are criteria for fruitful cooperation, and what structures do we need, and how do actors need to change? We already heard that you asked about homophobia, and so I would like to know what are red lines for cooperation. We also heard about corruption, and I will take some notes for the criteria and also for the red lines, because I always dislike it and I go home with my head full of information, but somehow I can't remember anything, so I will take some notes. So we already heard homophobia. Nicta, so what would you say? What would be a red line for cooperation? Could you mention that clearly, or does it depend on the situation? Could homophobia be such a red line, or is it rather female genital mutilation, or what could that be? Something what we say, okay, we would never ever work together.
Yeah, first of all, a red line for who?
For you as an organization, not for you as a person, so
okay.
For your organization, African Instituted Churches.
One of the things we want to do clearly here is that as the OAIC, everybody is loved, everybody is cared for. When we are doing food security, we are not looking for your sexual orientation. When we are advocating for access for healthcare, quality healthcare, to quality education, to water, and that. But at the same time, certainly we work with the churches who have basic values on how they look, on how we look at marriage. That is clear, and it cuts across the continent. Not simply for the OAIC.
So I wrote down equality of people have to be guaranteed. Is that okay?
Certainly, but also in that framework, the challenge when you say red line is when you arrive in Africa and you draw a line, you make it a red line. We've seen that that's what raises even every kind of argument, saying you will not receive resources unless. Unless. Then, because that question is not coming from us, it's coming from the outside, it comes with power. It comes with domination. It comes with imperialism. Because that is not the only thing that is used. So the question that comes is the imposition, and many times it even hurts those you want to protect. Because it comes like that. But one of the things, certainly, I say that the basic values of those organizations we represent, but at the same time we are saying they are not used sort of to discriminate in the way we provide services, in the way especially we are strong on the whole issue of access to social services from public institutions.
But would you say that it should be rather a thing between local partners to have certain criteria, and that local partners say to each other, hey, we don't work with you if this and that? Would that be possible only for local partners? Because otherwise it will perpetuate the pattern of this colonial times, okay, white man comes and tell you what to do. So would you say that criteria should be a thing between local partners only? Or red lines?
Criteria, I think there are basic issues we have to look at. There are red lines. Look at the whole issue of accountability. If resources, we agree, resources are not going to be used for mission. If it's taken to build a church, that is a red line crossed. If resources are taken for political purposes, they are public resources, even church resources. That is a red line. So certainly, those basics should be agreed on. The criteria for working together has to be very, very clear from the beginning. And we are working with the Bread for the World because certainly we've agreed on certain criteria for partnership. Only that as we go into the future, we can also draw red lines as partners in the South, because we've seen those red lines coming from the North quite a lot. The question is, we should be asked, who's the criteria? And that's why we take long, even as we work with the Bread for the World, to draw out this. But the challenge for the Southern partners is that we don't put it on paper. And let me say this, many times partners in the South fear that if you put your position, you may miss the resources. And that is the whole thing. So the criteria for working together should be two-way. But at the same time, many times we've seen it's working well because we agree. It takes time to work on a partnership, to work on a contract, to work on how we are going to work together. So I think using the word red line, it's very imperial. I think that has been used in political processes. I see those, even one prime minister was drawing during his presentation in the UN, that this is the red line. I hesitate to use that word red line. It's been used so much in the politics and bringing it in development, but yet I think it is sticking to the criteria we agree on. We wouldn't like to bring the word red line. It comes with a lot of power because people in the South will never draw a red line. A red line will be drawn by someone who has money. Yeah.
So would you rather say, we'll come back to you later and after that round. Would you rather say that it's better to keep the conversation going, keep the relationship going, and hope for change rather than just cutting the relationship because someone hasn't done his or her duty or as a
we agree. There are principles like accountability in itself, transparency, the contract, what we've agreed on, that is clear. But the issue is bringing the phrase red line in development cooperation. If it gets out of this meeting as a community of this meeting who discussed and we included the red line, that will be very negative. But the basic principles like accountability, sticking to the agreements, sticking to the principles we are working with, that is key. It shouldn't be left out because cooperation comes out of a conversation and a process, and we agree on how we are going to work together, and we have to stick to what we agreed on. That is a basic principle in cooperation. That's why it takes time for us even to reach an agreement or a contract, because we have conversations both ways and we say yes. And what I like about Bread for the World is that Bread for the World has never said, this is what we want you to do. Interestingly, for Bread for the World, they ask, what do you want to do? And then we produce what we want to do. We discuss it. Bread for the World gives you the template for their proposal after you've presented your concept or proposal. That's what is interesting about this partnership, that we are understood before we get into the partnership. That's why we don't struggle. And that's why we don't talk about red lines much. Then, after that, when we've agreed on our vision, not Bread for the World's vision, and how our vision relates to the framework of Bread for the World, then a template is produced, then Bread for the World saying, okay, we've agreed that this is what you want to do, but these are the conditions we also have because we work with resources from the public, resources from government, and we say yes. That is fine, but soon we shall bring ours also.
Okay, thank you. Michael, you mentioned missionary work. You mustn't support missionary work. Is that a red line in general for you for development cooperation, or is it just because you have to be neutral? Would you say that?
We have long agreed principles between, for example, the church agencies and us. And one of the principles is in saying that we don't support missionary work. Then they can collect money, they can get donations, and the Protestant church and the Catholic ones and all the other smaller ones, they have this kind of collecting money going on. But it's not the task for us as a government to support missionary activities somewhere.
Yes, but would you say it's a red line in general in development cooperation, missionary work? You shouldn't do that at all?
I fully agree with Nicta, saying we are talking too much about red lines.
Okay. No? Okay, you're shaking your head. Maybe you would react to.
No, I agree with you.
Oh, okay.
The question is, if you talk about criteria, I would like to mention types of criteria, but not criteria itself. And you can, I would say there are three types of criteria. The one is related to faith, to beliefs, and to the values they foster, they promote. This is in terms of content, which belief are they promoting. And everyone may have his or her criteria, but this is for me a criteria type. The second one is, what sort of institutions are there? How are they organized? Are they transparent? How about accountability in the administration or management? Are they internally democratic in terms of internal organization or not? And the third one is related to the context, the third type of criteria. Who are they working with? The thing is, looking at the landscape of actors in a region, in a city, in a community. To which other organizations are they attached? who are they supporting or not. This is a term of actor constellations. Where do these communities or these institutions position? Where is their position? And that's for me. These are three different types of criteria. And if you, I think it's not special for communities. Those criteria, you can apply them to other organizations in development cooperation.
But you still said types of institutions, if they are democratic, transparent, what else?
For example, equality between men and women. Mm-hmm. If you take the Catholic Church, there is no equality in the Catholic Church. Are you allowed to work with them or not? But they are not promoting, in many cases, women discrimination. And this is you have two different levels of equality between men and women. Are they promoting the discrimination of women? No. Are they equal? Are they internally organized in terms of equality between men and women? No. So here you are. Here you are. You have two different levels of equality between men and women in terms of beliefs and in terms of internal organization. And you take other points, other values, other criteria, and it is the one thing to attach it to the institution and the other thing to attach it to the religion.
Mm. But would you say that...
I would say they are connected, but they are not the same.
But would you say that in any case the end justifies the means? So no, okay. So you would never. Yeah, but as Claudia said, there are institutions where, for example, women are not equal to men, and you still work with them because they run hospitals and they do this and that.
I'm not sure I understand your question, but perhaps it helps when I take another example, and not in terms of equality between men and women.
Or maybe I clarify. So if a community, a religious community, runs a hospital, but at the same time the community is homophobic, so would you say, okay, they run the hospital, so they help maybe per year thousands of people, but they're only 10% of the people are homosexual, so it's better to help thousands of people than to, and we forget about these 10% of homosexual people?
Reality is more complex. Yeah. It's not one against the other. Reality is complex, and you have to look at the whole, and holistic approach. And the point is, for example, the new challenge for cooperation with evangelical churches is that they are very fragmented, and you have a lot of churches, and you don't have the one bell you can ring when you want to talk to Mr. Authority in this church. You have a lot of small churches. So first of all, the challenge is you have to make a mapping of communities, mapping of leaders, mapping of institutional structure. There is more work, but you have so few, that many possibilities, and that a very high diversity of churches. So you have no need to exclude one, you have to choose one. So you have so many, the question is not who to exclude, but who to choose to work with. And then you look for those who are transparent, who are already doing development work, and those who are there where you don't find the state or you don't find the Catholic Church. I'm talking about Latin America. So the question is not who to exclude, but who to choose. And this is the easier way to go, and considering a lot of criteria on, I would say, at least 3 different levels.
Okay, So, would you like to react?
Yeah, no, I don't want to react, but I want to act in a way, in a way to support her saying. If I look at your example in the hospital, the point for us is if for example, the Catholic Church is, as a church, says women can't become priests, so you can call it a discrimination. But as long as within the work they don't discriminate, that's the point for me. So within this area, there's no discrimination. In the Catholic Aid Agency, there's no discrimination of women. Or if you look at your hospital and the homophobic whatsoever community, the point for me is they can be homophobic. That's their problem. But the point for me is if they refuse to treat homosexuals in the hospital, that's the point. Yeah, and also the colleague, I always have to do like this because there's a spotlight behind me. I'm not trying to put you away. I just want to make it quite clear. We even have somewhere a policy paper, I don't have it with me, concerning the LGBTI community. And of course we are supporting them. We are supporting a right of advocacy and so on, because we Germans believe that everybody has the right to live in the way he wants to live, as long as he's not harming other people. And but on the other hand, we also try to keep on working. For example, I don't know, is it Uganda or where you get the death penalty if you are homophobe? Or I still remember the Zimbabwean ex-president Banana. He went to prison because it was sad, at least, and he was judged that he had a sexual relationship with a male servant. That's their problem, but I mean, we still keep on working a little bit within Zimbabwe. We don't keep out of Zimbabwe because they jailed the ex-president. You know what I mean? So, but our policy as a government, and also together with the civil society organizations my department is working with, is quite clear. And we give money to quite a number of LGBTI advocacy groups worldwide. And in Brazil, and then I finish my point, Brazil is, as she rightly pointed out, there's not one evangelical church, but for example, the evangelical church the President Bolsonaro comes from is an absolutely homophobic one.
He's from the Catholic Church. He's from the Catholic Church.
No, he's a Protestant, sorry. Of course. I'm half a Brazilian. You want to tell me that Bolsonaro...
I think we should discuss that later. I think Reinhard wanted to react.
Originally he was Catholic, but here in Germany you have to sign a paper that you are not Catholic anymore. In Brazil you don't need to sign anything. He is evangelical priest, and he is exactly putting up this kind of policy.
Well, I think you can, maybe that is stuff enough for discussion later on.
And we just don't have only the question of homophobic, hunting down homophobic, under homophobic, pretext, poor guys in Brazil. I met already one exiled gay leader here with the Heinrich Böll Foundation. But what I read today in the newspapers, that now in Rio de Janeiro and some other areas, evangelical people coming out of this Bolsonaro context have started to destroy temples of African believers of Candomblé and Umbanda. No? And this is so, but we keep on working in Brazil. And the most important point, I will say, there are thousands of evangelical different churches within Brazil, and Bolsonaro belongs to one which is unfortunately not very nice.
I think Reinhard, you wanted to say something.
Yeah, I wanted also shortly to explain what Bread for the World is thinking on such question of criteria, or you might call it safeguards or whatever. I mean, the basic point is, of course, that and it was said before, that of course we have criteria and many standards which are looking at financial administration, anti-corruption policies, and so on and so forth. And another point is, of course, that all our partner organizations has to be organized in a democratic way, and we are looking increasingly not also on the board structures, and to see that in these organizations we really see that all opinions have their saying and can organize themselves. And we found out 1 weak spot, and not only Bread for the World found out, is of course child protection policies. So this is something which we will add in future, that we engage with partners whether they have a child protection policies, and they will have over time to even have complaint mechanisms, so that in case somebody feel he was violated by a partner organization, they had a chance to bring complaints before the partner organization or directly Bread for the World, so that we have mechanisms where this kind of complaints can be dealt with. But I don't want to avoid the question that, of course, the German Protestant churches often have different opinions with our partner churches on questions like the role of women in the church. Women ordination in many partner churches is not the case. And of course, LGBTI rights are a question, or before it was, for example, HIV/AIDS policies. And the way we are dealing with it is that not that we have there a strict red line. The one is that we are engaging in discussions, and like here, two colleagues, a former theological advisor and the current theological advisor are in the room, and they have with partners discussions about what is the theological perspective on homosexuality, and we had workshops, for example, in Malawi with evangelical churches to discuss it and try to do it in respect of our traditions and discuss this, but not to say, okay, if you're not if you're not in favor of gay marriages, so we throw you out. I mean, if a partner would have an aggressive stance to say on death penalty, on homosexuality, I mean, this could be a red line. So if somebody is really violating human rights, of course, this will bring our partnership to an end. But I mean, this is not what we are discussing.
You mentioned workshops, so yeah.
And another point is that we are open and listening to the different voices in faith-based in the churches in Africa on these complicated issues, and we try to give them a voice. For example, we are working with the YMCA, which have a program of positive masculinity, which is embracing various things. I mean, gender roles and family, but coming up to homosexuality. And we have it with a few other mainly Christian youth organization programs where African youth, which might have a different opinion than African elders on the issues, can have a voice in the discussion in their churches, and then inside the African churches, church members will discuss what is their theological interpretation of the Bible and their stance on homosexuality. And we had it with HIVH, with Inarela is the name, right? This organization of AIDS-positive church leaders, and this is, I think, our role, that we give voices to such groups in the church, and otherwise engage in a dialogue, but we do not draw their red lines now.
Okay, so you mentioned workshops. What kind of other formats do you use to work with the people? To lead to come to a next point, the formats. You mentioned that you do workshops. So what kind of formats would you use for working together to come to our next point? What formats do we need to work together?
I mean, we are in general supporting a lot of different kind of projects, and as I said, if we are working, if there's I mean, it's not our part only to define the policy of the partners, and it is their proposal what they want to do, and Nicta explained how the process is going, and we are discussing the proposals, and if we are looking really on this kind of contentious issues in the church organizations, it is really for us more the point to see where are partner organizations, women's organizations, for example, to give them a voice and a role that they can bring women issues into their churches. And we have, I don't know, 30, 40 women organizations, faith-based women organizations we are supporting, and they are doing the discussions, and we are not really, it's not that we are advising another church on
how to do that,
on their idea on homosexuality, and
so they doing the practical work, but you guide you.
I mean, mainly Bread for the World is an organization where, of course, the main is the main resources that we are providing finances for projects, for ideas of our partner organization. In addition, I mean, the dialogue, as Nicta said, is something in the ecumenical family, a hope where we have really a lot of patience and mutual respect to discuss how to improve such projects. But the content is developed by partner organizations. And in some issues, if they ask to say, we want to have advisor on a specific issues, we try to do matchmaking and find advisor, but normally it's just a part of their projects, how to do it. And we are not, I said, we are not doing projects ourselves, never. You never find a Bread for the World project on the African soil, but we have 500 projects which are financed by Bread for the World, but they are only completely projects by our partner organizations. That's the way we are working.
Okay, Claudia, but what would you think, what kind of new formats would we need? We heard about workshops, what about the digitalization, maybe also, or other kind of formats, what would you think could help?
I'm not sure at which level we are talking about formats, because there you have modes of international cooperation, and they are a very abstract high level. And then is the question of techniques for coming together and doing things. So there are two very different levels of working together and of asking about formats. I do not have the creative idea for formats. I have more questions, or I see challenges. The main thing is, since development cooperation is not only about giving money, but also about dialogue, the question is, who are the partners for dialogue? And if you can take Brazil, if you take the biggest evangelical churches, they are empires. They are not only religious empires, but they are also media empires, and they are economic empires. So it is very easy to identify the heads of these big, these big churches, but they don't need funding from outside. They have enough money, and you have there what I call the power trinity: economic power, religious power, and political power.
So you rather support with knowledge than with money?
I have nothing against Trinity, but power trinity is for me a little bit a problem. So I wouldn't support from outside the power trinity, but this you can
not at all, but support with knowledge, or not
they
support.
Don't need your knowledge. Okay. They don't need your knowledge. They can. We can learn about merchandising and a lot of things. So we are talking about very big dimensions. They are enterprises with media, with papers, with temples, and so on. But there you have a clear hierarchy. You can identify the head, and they are a high institutionalization. But the partners you would love to work with are poor, are distributed all around the country. They have perhaps no institutionalization you need to give them money. And this is the challenge. First of all, there is a lot of more work to do to identify the right partners, which are in the periphery of Latin America and small villages. And then the question is, do they have the structures you need to give them money according to standards of OECD, for example, yes? And this is the challenge. And the big ones, you know them, they don't need your help, and I would say it's not a good idea to support the power trinity.
Okay. Would you like to react?
Yeah, I think new ways of partnerships. I think, how do we move beyond, like in the South, receiving, to transforming the way development is looked at and the way poverty is responded to? Because we struggled in the shaping of sustainable development goals. And at the end of the day, the governments of the North and the businesses of the North allowed business to be more prominent in the SDGs. Really, business is more prominent in the SDGs than faith. And we are saying, there is a writer from Nigeria called Wole Soyinka, Professor Wole Soyinka. Wole Soyinka writes and says, when slaves, let me give this phrase as an African, if I don't tell a story, I will not have spoken. He says that when slaves were being transported from Africa to the coast, the West African coast, there is a type of tree they left. And that tree was used at that point, that whenever slaves and those who were buying them and those who were selling them were brought from the hinterland, they had to go around that tree. And the aim of dancing around that tree, going around, it was not even dancing. How can you dance when you're a slave? Going round the tree, and for those slave traders and the buyers thought it was dancing. Going around, and they called it the tree of forgetfulness, so that it could wash the consciences of those who were being sold to know that it is okay, and those who had sold them to wash away the guilt. SDGs, development cooperation, should not be trees of forgetfulness of what has been done to Africa. We have to sit and talk about the issues that are keeping the poor in poverty within Africa ourselves, the corruption, the wastage, that 30% of national budgets are stolen or wasted, the imbalance in trade with the North, and all those other structural issues, the failure to deal with climate change, because if you are driving and you run into my house, you don't give me aid to repair it. You pay. That's what we are saying with the climate change. If Africa has emitted only 3%, the development cooperation should not be simply to see how Africa will get more aid, but about the climate justice on how those who have destroyed the planet will pay, not how they will help. I think that is the cooperation we are looking at in the future, not how can we help you. How do we pay? That is the question. Yeah.
I think this is a nice final statement, that the SDGs should not be trees of forgetfulness. And I think we have really a lot to discuss also about climate justice. It's already 5:30, but maybe we have time for, Philip, maybe 3 more questions, or should we just close? Yeah? Okay, maybe 3. Collect 3. Okay, I collect 3 questions and then we continue outside. Okay, so, yeah.
My name is Hans. Sorry.
My name is Hans from Germany. I see and feel the need for finding new forms beyond economic or money cooperation. What I have felt during my working time was that dialogue and fellowship is very much needed and welcomed, and therefore we do not really have instruments to develop well fellowship. To make it very clear, praying together as a white man with a black man. Yeah, white.
So you look for new forms, and
for new form,
yeah.
and which respect the religious dimension. To be very clear, is necessary in my understanding. And how could that be introduced into the scheme of development cooperation? That's the question.
Thank you. Philip?
Thank you very much for this exciting discussion. I want to relate to what was said about who sets the...
I want to relate to what was said about who sets the criteria. And in our research, it has become very clear that religious communities, and we have done this with African-initiated Christian, we have done this with respect to African-initiated Christianity, our research. Religious communities are already development actors. What many religious communities are not is partners of international development cooperation. Why is that so? Because they are not professional development actors in the sense that they are operating according to the standards, to the ideas, to the notions of development, to the very principles that there are in terms of the structures. They don't know how to write the proposal. That is very often the issue. They don't know what keywords to put in the proposal. So how do we broaden development cooperation to include these actors that are fundamentally important in their contexts and are already engaged according to their priorities? They are rooted in the communities according to their priorities in the work, in development work, but they are not operating to the priorities that are set somewhere here in faith-based or government institutions in the north.
Thank you for that. Maybe a third question? Okay.
Yeah, thank you. I'm actually from Kenya. The initial question actually was answered very well by Gabriele for the world. But now when I was seated here, I was thinking loudly and asking myself about the refugees. Kenya, we are told Kenya is the home of the largest group of refugees in Africa. And 2 years ago, Kenya decided that they should go back to their countries, that is Somalia and Sudan, because there was a lot of insecurity in the refugee camp. And they thought that it was said that most of the terrorists and those activities they operated within the refugee camp. I'm asking whether you're in the consortium of finding a way, a method of mitigation that these refugees, who are more than 500,000, how they can be assisted. Maybe they don't know how to write those proposals, maybe they don't know what to do, and maybe the refugee system is not reaching them, and they are suffering, and they are waiting to be assisted. Is there a way that they can also be grounded? They can be maybe taken to their country and they help you when they are there. Taken back.
So what is your question then?
Sorry?
Sorry, what is your question?
Yeah, the question is, do you have a mechanism of helping these people? Is there a consortium that sits down to see how they can be helped from you?
Okay, so maybe only one answer to every question. So the first answer was, first question was about new forms besides economic funding. What could be new forms for fellowships with respect to religion?
I think for Bread for the World, I mean, it is a constant struggle where we are working between being a professional development organization fellowship, as Hans said it, and definitely, I mean, there is always a danger that we forget this kind of fellowship, of praying together with our partner organization, and this is something where we have to stay sensible to do it, and definitely I think this is something where we have to develop more time to work together in ways of a pilgrimage, of a fellowship, specifically I think in crisis situation like the South Sudan or like northern Nigeria, or in the Sahel region, where we see with traditional forms of development cooperation, of giving money, we are not getting forward, and I mean, to have the spirit of working together, the fellowship, prayers are for us an important part to work, and we are not getting stronger perhaps to spread for the word, but we have to become stronger on it, but this is more about our consciousness, how we are working together, and I think this is allowed, even if we are of course working with public money, as long as we make sure the fruits of our prayers is open for everybody. And perhaps I can say one word also to Philip's questions about this kind of access to money and what it means. I mean, for me, the main point would be not so much I mean, I have a fear that churches are there for the long term, and they are maybe not the best to respond to this kind of short-term funding proposals and options. And Nicta, I mean, that we are not an implementing organization for international organizations. And for me, this wouldn't be really the way forward, what we would like to support. What I feel is that we, together with our partner organizations, we have both on our sides, we to the international organizations and our partners to their governments, to make sure that the implementation of the policies at least do no harm to what is existing on social services of the churches on the ground. Because what we see as the biggest danger for church-related development activities is that a lot of sector reforms are driving out, this is what's on the ground from church actions in the area of primary, secondary education, in health provision, and we see a lot of sector reforms supported by World Bank or GSZ or whatsoever, who's really looking mainly on state actors. And with these, for example, in Cameroon, where churches are losing out in the education sectors, in Tanzania, or the support of the government for Christian health associations breaking down. So if we together can make sure that no harm is done, but there's really a pluralistic system where churches, our partners, can work as other organizations in providing health and education whatsoever, this would be already a big step forward. And this is, I think, where we together have to work much more political and bring this kind of international activities Michael Fiebig was talking about, to make it more concrete and say, at least do no harm, and make sure in these kind of programs you're rolling out to achieve the SDGs, that there is a fair access of the churches. This is often all they need, and not only focus on state structures and the private sector to do it. Confessional education and health services is in Africa, I mean, the pillar and the backbone in outside the cities for social services, and this is in danger, and at the moment the direction is going the opposite side. So do no harm, and where we have to be strong towards our governments would be, for me, the first point, not so much to say, oh, they need new types of funding. They need fair access to what is there in the structures of funding and social services.
Okay, thank you. Maybe we come to the third question.
Okay. Yeah, on the same issue Philip is talking about, I think it's not simply resources that are needed. There are those organizations who really need resources. They are doing good work, but they don't have the structures. Most likely incorporating the whole process of accompaniment, so long as the agencies in the North agree that they are doing great work, but they don't have structure. A certain form of capacity building process, institutional development is key. I think we need to integrate institutional development if we are going to include those who have been excluded. I think even the OAIC, if you look at the OAIC at the beginning, we
couldn't have qualified. But it's been a journey. But inward looking also to say, you don't have to do it because you need money. You do it because you want to be effective and efficient as an organization. Then the external fits in too. There is also those who already even have the structures in place and the systems, but they are not known. How do we make sure that they come to the surface and they are part of development cooperation between the North and the South? There are many who qualify, but they have never been part of this cooperation and they are still far from it. I think it is important that we look at it. Then finally, for the partners in the North, it is to go beyond, and thank God for Humboldt partnership, doing the research, grateful for all getting involved in this, to know beyond what has always been known as Christianity or the church globally, that the church is beyond what has always been known. I think this is a positive process. What matters is what will come out of it in relation to those who have always been left out in development cooperation.
Okay, thank you for that. I think we have to come to the last question. I'm sorry that I have to cut that discussion now. I'm not sure if I got it right, but I understood that you asked what mechanism could be used to reach people in Kenya, and I understood refugees. I'm sorry. Yeah. Okay.
I have to admit it's a bit outside my work, but of course within the ministry we have a special unit working with refugees worldwide. And not only with refugees leaving Africa towards Europe, but internally displaced persons. So there are projects going on in Kenya, in Nigeria, in Uganda, in southern Sudan. We're working already on it. And if necessary, I'll give you my card. And if you have questions, I forward your questions to the unit in charge. Yeah, okay? Thank you.
Thank you very much for this discussion and for all questions.
And apologies for allowing the additional round of questions. I had my own interest in that. We would like to thank all of you very much, and we have a small present, small gift for you. Actually, five small gifts for each one of you. It's not a joint gift, although you are most welcome to consume the gift jointly, if you want. Allow me to start with our panel chair. Gabi, thank you very much. And we'll continue with the second lady on the panel. Thank you very much. And entirely gender equity. Everybody receives the same.
Hate flowers.
We were thinking about flowers.
Yeah, sorry, due to our very strict anti-corruption regulations.
Then I propose we open the bottle and we can have the glass here. Or is that also against the regulations? No. Now you're putting everybody else under pressure. Thank you very much, Reinhard.
We are allowed to take it on, I think, up to 10 euros. So over it. But actually, we wouldn't have been allowed to give it away because we are not allowed to finance alcohol. But thanks, so I get it from you.
I will not make any statement on the price of this. Thank you very much, Nicta. Greatly appreciated. Thank you very much.